ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. The European Union and 5 Central Asian nations, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, have convened their inaugural summit in Samarkand in Uzbekistan. Now, this historic gathering aims to forge a new strategic partnership, enhancing cooperation across sectors such as trade, transport, energy and digital connectivity. Joining us today on TVP World to delve into the implication of this summit is Bruce Pannier, a board member at the Caspian Policy Center. With decades of experience analyzing Central Asian affairs, Mr. Pannier offers us invaluable insights into the region's evolving geopolitical landscape. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Thank you for inviting me.
So first, can you help us outline the primary objective of this first EU Central Asia Summit, and why is this significant at this juncture?
Well, I mean, this has been building up for quite a while. There's significance on very many levels. One, I suppose, with activity, when Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, there was sanctions immediately placed on Russia by the European Union. They don't want goods being transported through Russian territory and entering Europe. Well, if you want to trade with China, for example, then that presents quite a problem. So what they've been doing for the last few years is trying to develop what's called the Middle Corridor in China, but also the Trans-Caspian trade route. That connects Central Asia to Europe by a route that doesn't go through Russia, and then, of course, by extension to China also. So last year, the European Union came up with their Global Gateway program, and they put $10 billion into connectivity with Central Asia. So now they have a route that connects them with China that goes through Central Asia. But in the meantime, technology is changing, and so is trade. So there are goods that Central Asia has, specifically critical raw materials at the moment. And the European Union needs these things, uranium being one. And for instance, Kazakhstan is the leading producer and exporter of uranium in the world. So for your nuclear power plants, you need a connection to Kazakhstan, but they have a lot of the other critical minerals too. And the European Union wants to buy those from Central Asia. I can talk a little bit more about that because the European Union actually has a very good program for that. But in the meantime, now they have a route that goes from Central Asia that goes right to Europe. It doesn't go through Russia. So there's building on that level too. You mentioned energy. Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Azerbaijan are working on a program that deals with renewable energy, and they're looking to build a power transmission line across the Black Sea that will bring 1,000 megawatts of electricity to Europe. I mean, there's a number of things in the basket here.
And there's also this announcement of a 12 billion euro gateway investment package. How does that aim to transform the economic landscape of Central Asia?
Yeah, well, this is on top of the 10 billion that they promised last year, which was mostly going to connectivity. Now, the investment program is going to deal with a lot of other industries that are in Central Asia. I mean, some of it will go to connectivity and building the infrastructure and means of transporting goods across there too. But I had mentioned critical raw materials, and now I can come to that too. The European Union plan is not just for the Central Asians to dig up all these minerals and then send them in raw form all the way to Europe. What they're trying to do is help the Central Asians to build the plants that are needed to refine these critical raw materials. So you're going to employ more people in Central Asia. You're going to get a finished or nearly finished product instead of just raw material, which of course will take a little bit less space, so transportation fees will go down a little bit, even though obviously the product is going to cost a little bit more. But I mean, the Central Asians benefit from this, and that's something that countries like China, for instance, or even Russia don't do usually. They import raw materials. So the Central Asians are getting the base sum for a price for what they're exporting, and then it's refined, processed, whatever, in another country. So that works to their advantage too. Now, part of this is also for renewable energy. I had mentioned the power transmission line that they're talking about building to bring electricity from Central Asia and through the Caucasus to Europe. This money, part of this investment money is going to go for renewable projects in Central Asia. And of course, the officials at the summit were very clear about this. We're going to do wind in Kazakhstan, solar in Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan, and hydropower in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. A lot of that power will stay in the region, but a lot of it will be for export, not necessarily just to Europe, but countries in the nearby, in the neighborhood, so to speak. Pakistan, Afghanistan is one, Turkey is another one that might get some of this. So, I mean, there's really a lot there. And that's what this investment package, at least part of what this investment package is.
You briefly touched on China and Russia, and we do know that Central Asian region traditionally is kind of stuck between these two great powers vying for their influence. Do you think that this new initiation from the European Union will introduce any sort of geopolitical changes in that regard, or will it be another key player in the region?
Well, I mean, one, let me just mention that the European Union really is a key player in Central Asia already. It is, as a bloc, it is the leading trade partner with Kazakhstan, which of course has by far the biggest economy in Central Asia. So they already have that going for them. So the deals that they signed, at least according to the Uzbek president and EU officials, should make the EU also Uzbekistan's leading trade partner in the coming years too. Now, as far as comparing what happens with Russia and China and the way the EU is going about this, the European Union, now they're talking about investing. I said renewables, I mentioned, is one thing. Critical raw materials is another. When China and Russia get involved in these big projects, and they have been in China and has built some of these renewable energy projects. Russia has invested in hydropower in Tajikistan, certainly. When they invest in this, the Central Asians incur big debts from this. They don't have the money to do this for themselves. So the Chinese or the Russians loan them this money. There's a case of a hydropower plant in Tajikistan that the Russians finished more than a decade ago. And the Tajik government still has not been able to pay that off. So Russia is still part owner of this. Now, the EU plans don't do that. They help to fund the construction, and they bring in the know-how and construction companies to do it. But when they leave, and when the project is finished and the factory or whatever they built is done, it is Central Asian at that point. It belongs to them. They might have some small amounts of money to pay back, but nothing like the debts that they've incurred to Russia or China in the last 10, 20 years. Which come into the billions and billions of dollars, and in some cases, for the smaller Central Asian countries, are going to be impossible for them to pay off for the next 20 or 30 years. The EU doesn't do that. They stress the fact that it's durable, it's got, and it comes with no strings attached, and we don't leave you with a huge debt after the project is completed.
Right, and at the same time, we also do know that Turkey is trying to make itself a key player in the area as well. How does Turkey and the Organization of Turkish States play into this?
Well, this is a good hook too. The Organization of Turkish States is, I suppose you could look at it as another competitor to Russia and Chinese influence, and I suppose even to what the EU is doing. However, Turkey certainly doesn't have the money to fund a lot of these projects. They are a cultural cousin of the Central Asians, which is why there's the Organization of Turkic States. It includes Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan, with Turkmenistan as an observer. All those are Turkic peoples. Azerbaijan is in the organization also. They are Turkic people. So there is some investment, and they do have their own charter where they're trying to map out being an economic bloc that can compete with the big economic blocs in the world, maybe the EU, but other economic blocs too, that have formed in the world. So they have that aspect to them. They also have a security dimension, which is something that the EU is helping the Central Asians with, but not to the extent of the Organization of Turkic States. So, the Organization of Turkic States is an important addition to Central Asia that's just shown up in the last couple of years. But in fact, they are not in a position where they can finance a lot of these projects. Although in terms of connectivity, it's very there's parallels here, because of course the export routes out of Central Asia, or import routes from Europe into Central Asia, would quite naturally go through countries like Turkey and Azerbaijan. So they are part of this process too, even though they are not specifically part of the deals that were signed today.
Right, and we're also looking at, while Europe is trying to deepening its tie with Central Asia, most of these countries do have a less stellar track record when it comes to human rights concerns. Do you think that by establishing these ties with them, the EU's ability to address these concerns will be taking a backseat?
Taking a backseat, I wouldn't say. These issues are always raised in meetings, really between any Western country and the Central Asians. So they bring this up. It's pragmatic. There's no doubt about it. You want to do business with the Central Asians. As I said, there's goods that the Central Asians can offer, to Europe, and of course, that Central Asia could be a market for some of the stuff that Europe has too. They will mention this. It's very difficult right now to force or even pressure the Central Asian governments into changing their ways. They are chronic rights abusers for the most part. They don't. People there don't enjoy the same kind of freedoms that they would in Europe. However, the Central Asians have such a big variety of partners that they can deal with. We've talked about China and Russia, but we could talk about the Arab states too. Now, if you're competing with these kind of people and you understand that they are not going to raise these rights issues when they're trying to do business with the Central Asians, then it puts you at a disadvantage. You can make sure that you keep rights issues on the plate when you go in and talk to the Central Asians. But at the same time, you have to understand that if you're going to force this issue, and if other business deals are going to be dependent upon changes in rights, it puts you at a disadvantage, as I said. So it won't be forgotten. Hopefully, there'll be lots of openings where the European Union can press the Central Asians to open up a little bit, liberalize their systems, respect human rights more broadly. But in the meantime, it is the business world. And if you want to compete and you want a footprint in there and you want to do good trade, you're going to have to figure out a way to finesse your language, I suppose is the best way to do it, to make sure that you get your message across about rights and you really hope that they change and make some reforms, while at the same time appreciating the fact that they're a reliable partner for goods that you're trading with.
All right, we have a little bit of time left, so very quick, looking ahead, what are some indicators that we can look at to determine the success of this new strategic partnership between EU and Central Asia?
Actually, I think we've already seen some. I'd mentioned the money that they put in last year for connectivity. This is not new. Again, they were looking at this after February 2022 and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The cargo has gone up phenomenally. I mean, they were hoping to get it to 10 million tons going across through Central Asia and out to Europe annually by 2027. Well, they're already almost halfway there in just the last 3 years. So that already shows that this is a success. Are they going to be able to meet 10 million tons of cargo? Can they expand maritime cargo transport between the east side of the Caspian and the west side of the Caspian? Railways, roads. How many of these projects renewable projects that they're putting money into and investing, how soon will they be done? I mean, a lot of these projects actually can be finished in 2 or 3 years. So it's not very long until we can see the fruits of the deals that are being made today and the deals that have been made in the last 18 months, really, too, with the Central Asians. It'll be evident to us that there is progress. And this, I suppose, gets back to your rights issue. If the Central Asians start to see that this stuff is getting built, that their trade is expanding, they might be a lot more amenable to listening to conversations about maybe you should independent media would be a good idea. True, genuine opposition groups being able to participate in the political process, things like that.
Right. So we'll have to see how that turns out. But in the meantime, thank you so much for your input and insight, Bruce. Really appreciate it. And thanks for being with us on TVP World.
Great. It's always a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Cheers. And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.